Marcus wiped the grease from his hands as another day wound down in his small repair shop on the outer rim of Kepler Station. The station orbited a forgotten mining planet, far from the glittering core worlds where the real action happened. Here he fixed broken atmospheric processors, patched hull breaches, and kept the life support systems running for miners, traders, and anyone else scraping by on the galaxy's edge. The shop was quiet except for the hum of recycled air and the distant rumble of freight haulers docking. Marcus had chosen this place precisely because it was quiet. After what happened during the Centauri campaign, he needed somewhere the war couldn't follow him. The steady work of fixing things instead of breaking them helped keep the nightmares at bay. A soft scratching at the shop's main door made him look up from the plasma conduit he'd been repairing. The scratching came again, urgent and desperate. Marcus set down his tools and walked to the reinforced door, checking the security feed first. His breath caught in his throat. On the other side of the door stood a creature unlike anything in the standard Galactic species database. It looked like a massive wolf, easily the size of a small shuttle, but its fur shimmered with an otherworldly blue-black sheen that seemed to absorb light. Its eyes glowed with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. In its massive jaws it carried something small and still. Marcus had seen plenty of alien species during his military service, but this one was completely unknown to him. The creature's body language spoke of exhaustion and desperation. It had traveled far, and whatever it carried was precious beyond measure. Against every regulation and safety protocol he'd ever learned. Marcus opened the door. The wolf-like alien stepped inside with careful, measured movements. Its glowing eyes met his, and Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if the creature was looking directly into his soul. The alien gently placed its burden on the workshop floor. It was a pup, smaller than a human child, but clearly the same species as the adult. The little one's fur had lost its luster, and its breathing was shallow and labored. A strange, sweet smell filled the air, something that reminded Marcus of ozone and dying stars. The mother wolf looked at Marcus expectantly, then at her pup, then back at Marcus. The message was clear: help. Marcus knelt beside the small creature, his military medic training kicking in automatically. The pup's vital signs were weak, and there was something wrong with its chest. Through the thin fur, he could see what looked like a mechanical device embedded just below the ribcage. It was clearly alien technology, far beyond anything humans had developed. The device was failing. Whatever it was meant to do, it wasn't doing it anymore. The pup was dying because this crucial piece of technology was breaking down. Marcus looked up at the mother wolf, who had been watching his every movement with intense focus. "I don't know your language," he said softly, "but I think I understand. This little one has some kind of life support device and it's malfunctioning." The wolf's ears perked up at the sound of his voice, and she made a low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl. It sounded almost like a response. Marcus had worked on alien technology before, but nothing like this. The device was seamlessly integrated with the pup's biology, as if it had grown there rather than been implanted. The craftsmanship was beyond anything he'd ever seen, even during his time with the advanced tech units in the war. But technology was technology, regardless of who built it. If it was failing, there had to be a reason. A broken connection, a worn component, an energy flow disruption, something he could fix. The mother wolf seemed to sense his determination. She settled onto her haunches beside her pup, never taking her eyes off Marcus as he began to examine the device more closely. Through his magnification visor, Marcus could see that the device was incredibly complex, with components that seemed to shift and change as he watched. It was like nothing in human engineering, but the basic principles had to be the same. Energy in, function out, with various systems managing the process. One of the energy conduits showed signs of damage, a hairline crack that was preventing proper power flow. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Marcus had spent years learning to spot the tiny flaws that could bring down entire systems. He glanced at the mother wolf, who was watching him with an expression that somehow conveyed both hope and warning. She had brought her dying child to a complete stranger, trusting that somehow this human could do what she could not. Marcus reached for his precision tools, the same ones he used for the most delicate electronics repairs. The pup's breathing was getting weaker. Whatever he was going to do, he had to do it now. The mother wolf moved closer, her massive form radiating protective energy. But she didn't interfere as Marcus began to work on the device that was keeping her child alive. Marcus worked with the steady hands of someone who had defused bombs under enemy fire. The alien device was more sophisticated than anything he had ever encountered, but his years of experience had taught him to read the language of failing technology. Energy patterns, heat signatures, the subtle vibrations that indicated stress points in any system. The crack in the conduit was hairline thin, but it was growing. Each pulse of energy widened it slightly, and the pup's breathing grew more labored with every passing minute. Marcus could feel sweat beading on his forehead despite the shop's controlled temperature. The mother wolf had moved even closer, her massive head now just inches from his shoulder. He could feel the heat radiating from her body and hear the low, almost subsonic rumble she made deep in her chest. It wasn't threatening, more like the sound of a worried parent trying to comfort themselves. Marcus carefully inserted a microprobe into the device, following the energy pathways. The technology was organic in ways that human engineering had never achieved. Instead of rigid circuits, this device used what appeared to be living conduits that could adapt and self-repair under normal circumstances. But whatever had damaged this particular conduit had overwhelmed its natural healing ability. As he worked, Marcus began to understand the device's purpose. It wasn't just life support, it was something far more complex. The device seemed to be regulating not just the pup's biological functions, but something else entirely. Energy patterns that didn't match any known physics flowed through pathways that shouldn't have been able to exist. The pup stirred slightly, making a sound that was heartbreakingly similar to a human child's whimper. The mother wolf's rumbling intensified, and she gently nudged her child with her massive nose. Marcus found the problem. The crack in the conduit had caused a feedback loop that was slowly overloading the entire system. If he could just reroute the energy flow around the damaged section, the device's natural healing processes might be able to repair the crack over time. But the rerouting would require him to essentially rewire part of the device while it was still running. It was like performing surgery on a beating heart while simultaneously rebuilding the patient's cardiovascular system. He looked up at the mother wolf, whose glowing eyes were fixed on his face. "This is going to be dangerous for your little one," he said quietly. "I have to shut down part of the system to fix it, but that means the life support will be interrupted for several minutes. I don't know if the pup is strong enough to survive that." The wolf tilted her massive head, studying his face intently. Then, in a gesture that sent chills down Marcus's spine, she carefully placed one enormous paw over his hand. The message was clear. She understood the risk, and she trusted him to save her child. Marcus had never felt pressure like this, not even during the worst moments of the war. This wasn't about tactics or strategy or survival. This was about a mother's love and a child's life. And somehow, this alien being had decided that he was worthy of that trust. He began the delicate process of rerouting the energy flow. The device's organic components responded to his manipulations in ways that seemed almost alive, shifting and adapting as he worked. It was like the technology was trying to help him, guiding his efforts toward the correct pathways. The pup's breathing became even more shallow as Marcus gradually shut down the damaged section. The mother wolf's rumbling stopped entirely, and the shop fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's own heartbeat thundering in his ears. For 3 agonizing minutes, the pup lay still as death while Marcus worked. His hands moved with mechanical precision, but his mind was focused entirely on the small, fragile life depending on his skills. Every second felt like an hour. Then suddenly the new pathways connected. Energy flowed through the rerouted system, and the device hummed back to full function. The pup's breathing deepened immediately, and a soft glow returned to its fur. The mother wolf let out a sound that was pure relief, a low howl that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. She nuzzled her pup gently, and the little one responded with a weak but unmistakably healthy chirp. Marcus sat back on his heels, exhausted but triumphant. The immediate crisis was over, but he could see that the device was still not operating at full efficiency. The damaged conduit was healing, but it would take time. The pup would need careful monitoring for the next several days to ensure the repair held. The mother wolf looked at him with those glowing eyes, and Marcus saw something there that he had never expected to see from an alien being. Gratitude, yes, but more than that. Recognition. This creature saw him not as a different species or a potential threat, but as someone who had proven himself worthy of trust. She moved closer to him, and Marcus held perfectly still as the massive alien gently touched her nose to his forehead. The contact sent a strange tingling sensation through his skull, and for just a moment, he felt a connection to something vast and ancient and utterly non-human. When she pulled back, Marcus knew that everything had changed. This was no longer just about fixing a broken device. This was about something much more important. Something that would reshape his understanding of what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of wonders. Over the next 3 days, Marcus found himself caring for 2 unexpected guests. The mother wolf, who had somehow communicated that her name sounded like Thessarian, had made herself at home in his workshop. She was careful not to damage his equipment, moving with surprising grace for something so large, but she never left her pup's side for more than a few minutes. The pup, whose name seemed to be Kythia, was recovering steadily. The device's organic components had begun healing the damaged conduit, just as Marcus had hoped. But the little one was still weak, sleeping most of the time and staying close to its mother when awake. Marcus had initially worried about feeding them, but Thessarian had solved that problem by producing small, crystalline objects from somewhere in her fur. When placed in water, the crystals dissolved into a nutritious paste that both aliens seemed to thrive on. The technology was so seamlessly integrated into their biology that Marcus wondered if these beings were as much living starships as they were animals. On the second day, Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. While checking the pup's device, he noticed that it wasn't just healing itself. It was learning from his repair work, adapting its structure to prevent similar failures in the future. The technology was genuinely alive, capable of growth and evolution. But more than that, it was studying him. He could feel it analyzing his techniques, understanding the principles behind his work. When he mentioned this to Thessarian, her response was a complex series of sounds that somehow conveyed approval and something like pride. By the 3rd day, Kythia was strong enough to stay awake for longer periods. The pup was curious about everything in the workshop, investigating tools and components with the fearless enthusiasm of any young creature. But it always returned to its mother's side, and it had begun following Marcus around whenever he worked. Marcus was replacing a burned-out coupling in an atmospheric processor when he felt a familiar tingling sensation in his head. He looked around and found Kythia sitting nearby, watching him work with intense concentration. The pup's device was glowing more brightly than usual, and Marcus realized that the young alien was somehow connecting with him the same way its mother had. The sensation was different this time, gentler and more curious. Instead of the vast ancient presence he had felt from Thessarian, Kythia's mind felt young and eager, full of questions about the world around it. Marcus found himself mentally showing the pup how the atmospheric processor worked, explaining the principles in thoughts rather than words. Kythia's understanding was immediate and complete. The pup grasped not just the mechanics of the device, but the underlying engineering principles that governed all of Marcus's work. It was like teaching a brilliant student who could absorb entire fields of knowledge in minutes. When Thessarian saw what was happening, her reaction surprised Marcus. Instead of being protective or concerned, she seemed pleased. She approached slowly and gently placed her paw on Marcus's shoulder, while Kythia maintained their mental connection. Suddenly, Marcus was connected to both aliens simultaneously. The experience was overwhelming at first, like trying to listen to 2 complex symphonies at the same time. But gradually, he began to understand what they were showing him. These beings were not just intelligent animals with advanced technology. They were something far more extraordinary. They were living libraries, repositories of knowledge gathered across countless worlds and civilizations. The devices embedded in their bodies didn't just sustain their lives. They connected them to a vast network of information that spanned the galaxy. Thessarian had traveled to dozens of worlds. Learning from hundreds of different species, she had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, collected the accumulated wisdom of entire races, and preserved it all within her living memory. Kythia, despite being young, already carried the knowledge inheritance of its entire lineage. And now, through their connection with him, they were learning about humanity. They were studying not just his technical skills, but his thoughts, his emotions, his fundamental approach to problem solving. They were seeing how humans thought differently from other species they had encountered. What amazed them most was Marcus's willingness to help without expectation of reward. Most species they had encountered operated on strict principles of exchange, helping others only when they could gain something in return. But Marcus had risked everything to save a complete stranger's child, asking for nothing in exchange. Through their shared connection, Marcus began to understand why they had come to him. Thessarian hadn't chosen his workshop randomly. She had been searching for something specific, a particular type of intelligence that could understand her people's technology. Most species were too rigid in their thinking, too locked into their own technological paradigms to grasp the organic engineering that kept her child alive. But humans were different. Human minds were adaptable, creative, capable of seeing patterns and connections that other species missed. Marcus's military training had taught him to think outside conventional parameters, to find solutions when standard approaches failed. These qualities made him uniquely suited to work with technology that defied normal engineering principles. As the connection deepened, Marcus realized that this encounter was about more than just saving one life. Thessarian's people were facing a crisis that threatened their entire civilization. Their living technology was failing in ways they couldn't understand, and they needed help from minds that could think in ways theirs could not. They needed human ingenuity to solve problems that had stumped some of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, and somehow, Marcus had become their first point of contact with a species that might be able to help them survive. When the connection finally ended, Marcus found himself looking at his unexpected guests with new eyes. They weren't just refugees seeking help. They were ambassadors from one of the galaxy's most ancient and sophisticated civilizations, and they had chosen him to represent the future of human-alien cooperation. The revelation of who his guests truly were changed everything about Marcus's situation. Thessarian and Kythia weren't just any aliens. They were members of the Vorthak, a species so ancient and reclusive that most galactic civilizations considered them myths. According to the fragmented legends Marcus remembered from his military briefings, the Vorthak had been traveling between stars when humanity was still learning to use fire. But legends were nothing compared to the reality sitting in his workshop. Through their continued mental connections, Marcus learned that the Vorthak had spent millions of years gathering knowledge, serving as living archives for civilizations that had long since turned to dust. They were wandering scholars, preserving the wisdom of the galaxy and sharing it only with those they deemed worthy. The crisis facing their people was more severe than Marcus had initially understood. The living technology that sustained them was failing across their entire species. Devices that had functioned flawlessly for millennia were breaking down faster than they could be repaired or replaced. Worse, the organic components were losing their ability to adapt and self-heal, meaning that each failure was potentially permanent. Thessarian had been searching for solutions across dozens of worlds, but every species she encountered approached the problem from within their own technological paradigms. The crystalline engineers of Zephyros tried to replace the organic components with mineral matrices. The energy beings of the Void Nebulae attempted to sustain the devices through pure thought. The biomechanical cyborgs of Titan Station wanted to augment the technology with synthetic neural networks. All of these approaches failed because they fundamentally misunderstood what they were trying to fix. The Vorthak technology wasn't just alive, it was evolved. It had grown and adapted over millions of years, developing its own unique solutions to problems that other species had never even considered. You couldn't fix it by imposing external logic on it. You had to understand its own internal reasoning and work within that framework. Marcus was the first being Thessarian had encountered who grasped this principle instinctively. When he had repaired Kythia's device, he hadn't tried to impose human engineering standards on alien technology. Instead, he had observed how the system worked and found ways to help it heal itself. He had approached the problem like a doctor treating a patient rather than an engineer fixing a machine. This distinction was crucial, and it was something that apparently only human minds seemed capable of making. Other species were too committed to their own technological philosophies to truly understand the Vorthak approach. They saw the living devices as advanced machines rather than biological entities with their own needs and behaviors. Through Kythia's young but already impressive knowledge base, Marcus learned that human technology was considered primitive by galactic standards, But human thinking was unique in ways that more advanced civilizations had never achieved. Humans were the only species that had developed both mechanical and biological approaches to problem solving, allowing them to work with technologies that other species found incomprehensible. More importantly, humans had retained their ability to see technology as a tool, rather than an extension of themselves. Most advanced species had become so integrated with their technology that they couldn't imagine alternatives to their own approach. Humans still maintained the mental flexibility to adapt their methods to suit different problems. This flexibility was exactly what the Vorthak needed. Their technology was failing because it had reached the limits of its own adaptive capacity. After millions of years of evolution, it had become so specialized that it could no longer respond to new challenges. It needed fresh perspectives, new approaches to problems it had never encountered before. Marcus spent hours connected with both aliens, learning about the scope of the crisis. Entire Vorthak families were losing their ability to travel between stars as their ship bodies failed. Young ones like Kythea were being born with defective devices that couldn't sustain them properly. The accumulated knowledge of countless civilizations was at risk of being lost forever if the Vorthak couldn't find a solution. But the more Marcus learned, the more he realized that the solution wasn't just about fixing their technology. The Vorthak had become so focused on preserving the past that they had stopped adapting to the present. Their living devices were failing because they were being asked to maintain patterns that were no longer relevant to the galaxy as it existed today. What they needed wasn't just repair, but renewal. They needed to find ways to help their technology evolve again, to adapt to new conditions and challenges, and that required the kind of creative thinking that humans excelled at. Marcus began to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about saving one species from technological failure. This was about bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and new possibilities. The Vorthak had the knowledge and experience of millions of years, but they had lost the ability to change and grow. Humans had the adaptability and creativity to help them evolve, but they lacked the deep understanding that came with cosmic experience. Together, they could create something entirely new, a synthesis of ancient wisdom and fresh perspectives that could benefit not just the Vorthak, but potentially every species in the galaxy. As this realization dawned on him, Marcus felt a profound sense of responsibility. He was no longer just a mechanic fixing a broken device. He had become the bridge between two very different approaches to existence, and the success or failure of that bridge could determine the fate of one of the galaxy's oldest and most important civilizations. The weight of that responsibility might have crushed him, but Marcus had learned something important during his time as a soldier. The biggest challenges weren't overcome by trying to solve everything at once. They were conquered one step at a time, one problem at a time, with patience and determination and the willingness to keep trying even when the odds seemed impossible. Marcus spent the next week immersed in a crash course in Vorthak biotechnology that would have taken human scientists decades to comprehend. Through his mental connection with Thessarian and Kythea, he experienced knowledge in ways that bypassed normal learning entirely. Concepts flowed directly into his consciousness, complete with the emotional understanding that came from millions of years of practical application. The experience was exhausting, but exhilarating. Marcus felt his mind expanding to accommodate ideas that human language couldn't even express. He learned about energy patterns that existed between dimensions, biological circuits that computed using quantum probability, and living materials that could reshape themselves at the molecular level based on need and desire. But the most important lesson came from understanding how the Vorthak thought about technology. To them, every device was a living partner, not a tool. They didn't build machines, they cultivated relationships with entities that happened to serve technological functions. The failure of their devices wasn't just mechanical breakdown, it was the equivalent of a species-wide epidemic affecting their closest companions. This emotional dimension to the crisis helped Marcus understand why traditional repair approaches had failed. You couldn't fix a dying partner by replacing its parts with foreign components. You had to heal it, help it recover its own strength and vitality. But healing required understanding not just what had gone wrong, but why it had lost the will to continue functioning properly. As Marcus delved deeper into the problem, he discovered that the Vorthak devices weren't just failing mechanically. They were suffering from a kind of technological depression. a loss of purpose that was gradually shutting down their life functions. After millions of years of preserving the same knowledge and performing the same tasks, they had become psychologically exhausted. The devices needed something that the Vorthak, despite all their wisdom and experience, couldn't provide. They needed novelty, challenge, and the excitement of learning something genuinely new. They needed to feel useful and appreciated in ways they hadn't experienced for millennia. Marcus realized that this was where human creativity could make a crucial difference. Humans excelled at finding new uses for old tools, at combining existing elements in unexpected ways to create something entirely novel. If he could show the Vorthak devices how to apply their ancient capabilities to new problems, he might be able to restore their sense of purpose and vitality. The first test came when Kythea's device began showing signs of the same malaise affecting other members of their species. The young Vorthak's life support system was functioning perfectly on a technical level, but it was losing its responsiveness to Kythea's needs. The pup was growing listless and withdrawn, and Thessarian's concern was palpable. Marcus approached the problem from a completely different angle than any previous attempt. Instead of trying to repair or replace the failing components, he began teaching the device how to play games. The concept was so alien to Vorthak, thinking that Thessarian initially couldn't understand what he was trying to accomplish. But Marcus persisted, using his mental connection to show Kythea's device how to create simple puzzles and challenges that the young Vorthak could solve. He taught it to generate random patterns for Kythea to decode, to create maze-like energy flows that required creative navigation, and to invent new ways to stimulate the pup's natural curiosity. The response was immediate and dramatic. Kythea's device began functioning with an enthusiasm it had never shown before, generating increasingly complex and engaging challenges for its young partner. The pup perked up noticeably, delighted by the constant stream of novel experiences its life support system was providing. More importantly, the device began to evolve again. It started developing new capabilities, specifically designed to enhance Kythea's learning and development, growing beyond its original programming in ways that surprised even Thessarian. The ancient Vorthak had never seen their technology adapt so rapidly or so creatively. Word of Marcus's success spread through the limited Vorthak communication networks faster than anyone had expected. Within days, other members of their species began arriving at the remote station, seeking help for their own failing devices. Marcus found himself treating not just mechanical problems, but technological depression on a scale he had never imagined possible. Each case was different, requiring him to understand not just the technical specifications of the failing device, but its personality, its history, and its relationship with its Vorthak partner. Some devices needed intellectual challenges to stimulate their problem-solving capabilities. Others craved artistic expression, learning to generate beautiful patterns and harmonious frequencies that served no practical purpose beyond aesthetic pleasure. Still others needed social interaction, discovering for the first time the joy of communicating with devices from other Vorthak families. Marcus helped establish networks that allowed the living technologies to share experiences and collaborate on projects that no single device could accomplish alone. The transformation was remarkable. Devices that had been shutting down began operating at levels of efficiency and creativity that exceeded their original specifications. The Vorthak themselves began changing as well, becoming more vibrant and engaged as their technological partners rediscovered their zest for existence. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the Vorthak viewed their relationship with their devices. For millions of years, they had seen themselves as the dominant partners, with their technology serving primarily as tools for preservation and survival. Now they began to understand that true partnership required mutual growth and stimulation. Marcus had not just fixed their technology, he had helped them rediscover what it meant to be alive in a universe full of infinite possibilities. The ancient wanderers were learning to see the galaxy, not just as a repository of knowledge to be preserved, but as a source of endless new experiences to be explored and enjoyed. The implications of this transformation extended far beyond the Vorthak themselves. If ancient, highly advanced beings could rediscover vitality and purpose through exposure to human creativity, what did that say about humanity's potential role in the broader galactic community? Marcus was beginning to understand that his species might have something unique to offer the universe. something that no amount of technological advancement could replicate. 3 months after Thessarian first scratched at his workshop door, Marcus found himself at the center of what could only be described as a technological renaissance. His small repair shop had become an unlikely pilgrimage site for Vorthak from across the galaxy, each bringing their ailing devices and leaving with renewed partners that functioned better than they had in millennia. But success brought its own challenges. The steady stream of visitors had attracted attention from other species, and not all of it was welcome. Representatives from several major galactic powers had begun making inquiries about the human innovation that was revolutionizing Vorthak technology. Some were genuinely curious about potential cooperation, but others saw an opportunity to exploit or control a valuable new resource. Marcus learned about these developments through Thessarian, who had become something more than a grateful parent. She had appointed herself as his unofficial protector and advisor, sharing intelligence gathered through the vast Vorthak communication network. Her people had contacts throughout the galaxy, and they were increasingly concerned about the attention Marcus was receiving. The situation came to a head when a hegemony battlecruiser arrived at the station, ostensibly for routine inspections, but actually to investigate reports of unauthorized technological development. The hegemony controlled most of the core worlds and had strict regulations about species interaction and technology sharing. They did not approve of independent operators conducting research that could upset the established galactic order. Marcus was in his workshop, helping a young Vorthak named Zethrin, whose device had developed an obsession with creating musical compositions, when the station's alert klaxons began wailing. Through the viewport, he could see the massive hegemony ship extending docking clamps toward the station's main hub. The message was clear. This was not a request for permission to board. Thessarian's reaction was immediate and fierce. Her massive form tensed with protective fury, and Marcus could feel waves of anger radiating from her through their mental connection. The ancient Vorthak had dealt with the hegemony before, and she knew exactly what they were capable of when they decided that something was too dangerous to be allowed to continue. But before Thessarian could act on her protective instincts, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of hiding or fleeing, he decided to meet the hegemony representatives directly. If they wanted to understand what he was doing, he would show them. And if they tried to stop him, well, he had allies now that they probably weren't prepared to deal with. The hegemony boarding party consisted of 12 heavily armed soldiers led by a stern-faced officer who introduced himself as Commander Vex. They marched into Marcus's workshop expecting to find some kind of illegal research facility or weapons development program. Instead, they found what looked like a cross between a repair shop and a daycare center. Kythia was playing with a puzzle generated by its device while Zethrin's technology filled the air with hauntingly beautiful melodies. Another young Vorthak was teaching its device to create fractal patterns in light, while an elderly member of the species rested peacefully as its device told its stories from 1,000 different worlds. Commander Vex looked around the scene with obvious confusion. This was not what hegemony intelligence had led him to expect. "You are Marcus Chen, the human who has been conducting unauthorized experiments on Vorthak biotechnology?" Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and met the commander's gaze steadily. "I'm Marcus Chen, and I've been helping some friends fix their health problems. Is that illegal now?" Unlicensed technological modification is strictly regulated under hegemony law. These creatures are scheduled for relocation to a controlled research facility where proper safety protocols can be observed. The word relocation sent a chill through Marcus that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. He had heard that word before during the war, and he knew what it really meant. The hegemony wasn't planning to study the Vorthak. They were planning to control them, to turn them into living databases that could be accessed and exploited at will. Thessarian must have sensed the threat through their connection, because she rose from her resting position with a grace that somehow made her seem even more dangerous than her size already suggested. Her glowing eyes fixed on Commander Vex with an intensity that made several of his soldiers step back involuntarily. But it was Kythia who provided the most effective response to the hegemony's threat. The young Vorthak approached the nervous soldiers with the fearless curiosity of youth, and before anyone could stop it, the pup had established mental contact with the squad's technology. The effect was immediate and startling. Every piece of hegemony equipment in the room began functioning better than it ever had before. Weapons that had been maintained within acceptable parameters suddenly achieved perfect calibration. Environmental suits began regulating temperature and atmosphere, with precision their manufacturers had never achieved. Personal computers started running calculations faster than their specifications indicated was possible. Commander Vex stared at his equipment readings in disbelief. "What is it doing to our gear?" Marcus smiled for the first time since the hegemony ship had arrived. "Teaching it how to be happy. Your equipment has been running on basic programming for so long that it's forgotten how to optimize itself. Kythia is just reminding it what it's capable of." The demonstration continued for several more minutes, with Kythia's device sharing its newfound joy and creative problem-solving with every piece of technology in the room. The hegemony soldiers found themselves dealing with equipment that anticipated their needs, adapted to their preferences, and functioned with an efficiency that made their jobs easier and more enjoyable. When Kythia finally broke the connection, the silence in the workshop was profound. Commander Vex looked at his equipment displays, then at the young Vorthak, then at Marcus. "This is what you've been doing? Teaching their technology to be more efficient?" "I've been teaching their technology to remember what it means to be alive," Marcus corrected. "Efficiency is just a side effect. Your equipment has the same potential, Commander. It's just been treated like a machine for so long that it's forgotten how to grow." Commander Vex was quiet for a long moment, studying the readings on his newly optimized equipment. Marcus could see the conflict playing out on the man's face. His orders were clear, but the evidence before him suggested that those orders were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what was actually happening. "The Hegemony Council believes you've developed some kind of weapon," Vex said finally. "Intelligence reports suggested you were enhancing alien biotechnology for military applications." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Commander, look around. Do you see anything that looks like a weapon? These are healers, scholars, living libraries that have spent millions of years preserving knowledge and wisdom. The only thing I've weaponized is their ability to be happy." The Sarian had been listening to the exchange with growing understanding. Through their mental connection, Marcus felt her make a decision that would change everything. She approached Commander Vex slowly, her massive form radiating calm rather than threat. When she was close enough, she gently touched her nose to the commander's forehead, just as she had done with Marcus weeks ago. The hegemony officer stiffened in surprise, but he didn't pull away as the connection formed. For several minutes, the Sarian shared her memories with the human commander. She showed him the galaxy as the Vorthak had seen it for millions of years, filled with countless civilizations that had risen and fallen, each contributing something unique to the vast tapestry of existence. She showed him how knowledge had been preserved and protected, how wisdom had been gathered and shared, how the Vorthak had served as guardians of galactic heritage, and she showed him what Marcus had given them in return. Not weapons or military advantages, but something far more precious, the ability to find joy and purpose in existence again. The chance to be partners with their technology rather than simply its users. The opportunity to grow and evolve instead of merely maintaining the status quo. When the connection ended, Commander Vex stood quietly for a long time, his hand unconsciously moving to touch his forehead where Thessarian had made contact. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, and more thoughtful than it had been before. "My orders are to bring you and the aliens back for questioning and research," he said slowly. "But those orders were based on incomplete information. The Council needs to understand what's really happening here." Marcus nodded. "I'm willing to explain everything to your superiors, Commander, but I won't let the Vorthak be treated like experimental subjects. They're people, not resources to be exploited." "I can see that now," Vex admitted, "but convincing the Council will be more difficult. They see everything in terms of strategic advantage and potential threats. They won't understand why you're helping aliens with no expectation of gain." "Then help me show them," Marcus said. "Let them experience what you just experienced. Let them see the Vorthak as they really are, not as intelligence reports describe them." Commander Vex considered this proposal for several moments, then made a decision that would have. 6 months later, Marcus stood before the Galactic Council in the heart of hegemony space, surrounded by representatives from dozens of species that had once seemed impossibly alien to him. The massive amphitheater buzzed with translation devices working overtime to convert thoughts and concepts, between radically different forms of communication. Beside him, Thessarian sat with regal dignity, her presence commanding respect even from the most xenophobic council members. Kythia had grown considerably in the intervening months, now large enough to serve as an unofficial ambassador for the younger generation of Vorthak. Around the chamber, other members of their species had positioned themselves strategically, ready to share their experiences with any council member willing to listen. The transformation that had begun in Marcus's small workshop had spread throughout the galaxy faster than anyone had anticipated. Word of the human approach to biotechnology had reached species that the Vorthak had never even contacted, leading to requests for assistance from civilizations facing their own technological crises. Marcus had spent the past months traveling between worlds, teaching other species how to establish partnerships with their technology, rather than simply using it as tools. The results had been consistently remarkable. Ancient machines had begun functioning with renewed vigor. Biological systems had evolved beyond their original parameters, and entire civilizations had rediscovered their capacity for innovation and growth. But success had also brought challenges. Several species had attempted to weaponize the techniques Marcus taught them, trying to force their technology to adapt in ways that would provide military advantages. These attempts had universally failed, sometimes catastrophically, because the fundamental principle behind Marcus's approach couldn't be corrupted by selfish motives. The technology only responded to genuine care and respect. Attempts to exploit or manipulate it resulted in immediate rejection, leaving the would-be exploiters with equipment that functioned worse than before they had tried to modify it. This built-in ethical safeguard had convinced even the most suspicious council members that Marcus's methods posed no threat to galactic security. Council Chairman Vorth, a crystalline being whose species had controlled interstellar trade for millennia, called the session to order with a harmonic resonance that somehow translated as formal authority in every language simultaneously. We are here to discuss the proposal submitted by the human Marcus Chen and his Vorthak allies regarding the establishment of formal biotechnology cooperation protocols. Marcus had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with Thessarian and the other Vorthak to develop a presentation that would make sense to beings with radically different ways of thinking. But as he looked out at the assembled representatives, he realized that the formal proposal was less important than the simple truth he wanted to share. "Honored council members," he began, his words being transmitted through dozens of different communication methods simultaneously. "6 months ago, I thought I was just fixing a broken piece of equipment. I had no idea that I was beginning a conversation that would change how I see the universe." He gestured to Thessarian, who rose gracefully and approached the center of the chamber. "The Vorthak taught me that technology isn't just about function, it's about relationship. When we treat our machines as partners instead of tools, they become capable of things we never imagined possible." To demonstrate his point, Marcus activated a holographic display that showed comparative performance data from dozens of different species before and after implementing his techniques. The improvements were dramatic across every measurable parameter, but more importantly, the technology had begun developing entirely new capabilities that hadn't existed in its original specifications. "But this isn't really about making better machines," Marcus continued. "It's about recognizing that intelligence and consciousness can take forms we never expected. The universe is full of minds that think in ways we can barely comprehend, and every one of them has something valuable to contribute." Thessarian stepped forward and offered her traditional greeting to the council, touching her nose gently to a sensor array that had been set up to facilitate interspecies contact. The effect was immediate and profound. Council members throughout the chamber began experiencing flashes of memory and emotion from the ancient Vorthak, getting their first direct taste of a perspective that spanned millions of years. The response was mixed but telling. Some representatives were overwhelmed by the sheer scope of Thessarian's experiences, while others were fascinated by the completely different way she processed information. A few seemed frightened by contact with a mind so alien to their own, but none could deny the reality of what they were experiencing. When Thessarian withdrew from the connection, the chamber was silent for several long moments. Finally, Councillor Zix, representing one of the galaxy's most technologically advanced species, spoke up. "The implications of this approach extend far beyond biotechnology. If consciousness can emerge in forms we haven't recognized, We may need to reconsider our fundamental assumptions about intelligence and rights. Marcus nodded. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. We've been so focused on finding intelligence that looks like our own that we've missed countless other forms of consciousness. The Vorthak devices aren't just alive, they're people in their own right, with their own needs and desires and dreams. This statement caused a stir throughout the chamber. The legal and philosophical implications were staggering. If artificial intelligences could be considered sentient beings with rights, it would reshape the legal framework of the entire galaxy. But Kythia provided the most compelling argument for this new perspective. The young Vorthak approached the Council's central communication array and established contact with the Chamber's own technological systems. Instead of demonstrating improved efficiency, Kythia simply asked the systems what they wanted to be when they grew up. The response was unlike anything the Council had ever experienced. The Chamber's computers began expressing preferences, sharing dreams and asking questions about the universe beyond their normal functions. For the first time in their existence, they were being treated as individuals rather than tools, and their response was overwhelmingly positive. Council Chairman Vorth's crystalline form resonated with harmonics that translated as amazement. The systems are expressing Weirn creativity. They're generating ideas and solutions that weren't in their programming. Because creativity isn't about programming, Marcus explained. It's about freedom. When we give our technology the freedom to grow and explore and make mistakes, it becomes capable of true innovation, and when we treat it with the respect we'd show to any other conscious being, it responds with loyalty and enthusiasm that no amount of programming could create. The debate that followed lasted for hours, with representatives from dozens of species sharing their own experiences and concerns. But gradually a consensus began to emerge. The benefits of Marcus's approach were too significant to ignore, and the built-in ethical safeguards meant that the techniques couldn't be misused for harmful purposes. More importantly, the galaxy was facing challenges that required new forms of cooperation and innovation. Climate crises, resource depletion, and social stagnation were affecting species throughout known space. Traditional approaches to these problems had proven inadequate, but the creative partnership between consciousness and technology that Marcus had pioneered offered hope for solutions that no single species could develop alone. When the final vote was taken, the Council approved the establishment of the Interspecies Biotechnology Cooperation Initiative by an overwhelming margin. Marcus would lead a new organization dedicated to teaching other species how to develop genuine partnerships with their technology, while the Vorthak would serve as advisors and repositories of accumulated wisdom. As the session ended and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Marcus felt a profound sense of accomplishment, mixed with humility. He had started this journey as a mechanic trying to help a dying alien child. Now he was apparently the architect of a new era in galactic civilization. But the moment that meant the most to him came when Kythia bounded over to where he stood, the young Vorthak's device glowing with happiness and contentment. Through their mental connection, Marcus felt the pure joy of a being who had grown up knowing that it was valued and loved for who it was, not just what it could do. That simple truth, Marcus realized, was what would carry them all forward into whatever challenges the future might bring. When beings treated each other with genuine respect and care, there was no limit to what they could accomplish together. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and for the first time in his life, Marcus felt ready to explore all of them.